משפחת חיימי.
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch a tiger by the toe. If he hollers, let him go. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Not some, not half, all of them. Now, bring them all, achieve peace.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our weekly podcast. It is day 730 of the war, almost 2 years since October 7th, 2023. As Israel marks 2 years of that dark Saturday, the families of the remaining 48 hostages are holding their breath. A serious proposal is now on the table, one that could finally bring the hostages home and bring this war to an end. My name is Tal Schneider. I'm the political and diplomatic correspondent of the Time of Israel, and this podcast is produced in collaboration with the Hostages and Missing Families Forum, an organization that was established by the families of those abducted to Gaza during the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th, 23, on the big day of the massacre. And it is, unfortunately, the forum is still working because we want everybody back, people that were abducted and are alive, at least 20 of them, maybe even 22, and the rest of them that were announced murdered or dead, but if the families insist that all of them, dead or alive, will come back as soon as possible. Today, for the first time in a long, many weeks and many months, we have some hopes, and maybe it's realistic to bring an end to this unfortunate situation. So before we begin, and I will introduce our speaker today, I kindly ask you as global citizens to use your voice and use your abilities and your platforms online, on social media. You can share this episode, you can help us spread the word, and you can keep the hostages in the public hearts and minds all around the world. Whether it's taking it, talking to your colleagues at work, or maybe going to rallies, maybe posting on social media, or you can even go into the website of the forum, just Google the Families and Hostages and Families Forum, and go into the website, and you can email us with creative ideas on what else you think can be done. And also, if you would like to support the Hostages Families Forum, you can scan the barcode in the show notes, and you can visit an official donation page and help fund their global advocacy efforts. Let me just stress that everybody in this forum, obviously me, but everybody behind this podcast or behind the rallies or behind every type of event you see on TV, everybody are volunteering. The money you donate, if you do, is going straight to finance the advocacy of the families. Today, I am honored to be joined by Udi Goren. Hi, Udi. Cousin of Tal Haimin, a member of Kibbutz Nir Yitzhak, and he was a member of the emergency squad who went out to the fire early on that Saturday, and he was kidnapped. He was killed by gunfire of a terrorist, and then was kidnapped into Gaza. And Tal left behind his family in the early hours of that morning, and he went out to protect his fellow kibbutzniks. And he was on the phone with his wife, Ella, only once during that horrible morning. Ella was early in her pregnancy and gave birth to the couple's fourth baby, beautiful Lotan, on May 2024. So, Udi, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I know you made a special effort to be here. Thank you for making the effort.
Sure.
And you're joining us from a very special location on the ground in Jerusalem. You and other families have just opened correct me if I'm wrong, what I call a rescue sukkah, Sukkot Hatzalah, As you know, all of our listeners around the world, probably most of you are Jewish. You know, this tomorrow mark the first day of Sukkot, and you set up a rescue sukkah near the Prime Minister's private residence in Jerusalem as part of the family's effort to keep the hostages' cause alive and do real, work on the ground that will help bring the deal to a close. So tell us exactly where you are and what's going on, what's happening around you. We hear the noise. What's happening around you right now?
Yeah, so what you can't see is that this sukkah is right in the middle of the street. And the Prime Minister's home is about 300 feet this way. And we've been here, we came here this morning. Some of us came here last night as well. And, this terrible tragedy began on Sukkot, where we're supposed to sit in a sukkah, our temporary home, reminiscent of the time the Israelites left Egypt when we're on their way to the land of Canaan, to the Promised Land, and it represents this long journey that at the end of it they found the Promised Land. And unfortunately, till this day, in 2 days, we will mark the 2-year anniversary of this catastrophe. To this day, there are some sukkot still standing in the kibbutzim that were hit, where time just froze. And we think that there's nothing more symbolic than having this sukkah here, just by the Prime Minister's home, telling him, we don't have a home. We can't go back to our lives until the hostages are back home. And we are here not in demonstration, not in protest, we're not rooting against anything, but we are here to tell him, now is the time. Bring us to the Promised Land. There's a deal on the table. We have never been so close when, the American president himself brought forth this offer that answers every need, every term that we need, and also serves to the needs of the Palestinian people in Gaza. And this is it. And we will not let this opportunity pass. We will
Yeah.
be here until the deal is signed.
So we actually, can you put the photo back, to the editor of this program? Thank you. So we actually see you under the sky, which is under the sukkah roof, of course, which is a temporary kind of a tent, if you may call it. And we see next to you, we see Einav Tzangaker, the mother of 24, Matan, the dear cute guy who was from Kibbutz Niroz, who was abducted with his girlfriend on that horrible day. And then we see Michel Iluz, the father of Guy Iluz, a young musician who was at the Nova Festival and was kidnapped alive and murdered in captivity. And they stand next to you. You all, you have such an, resilient activity, ongoing activity, and you don't give up. Even when we think the deal is around the corner, you think the pressure must be still put on the Prime Minister office, even though he said last night that the deal is almost complete and he's very optimistic. So can you explain to us your persistence, your presence there?
Look, I want to say something about politicians speaking, okay? And it doesn't necessarily has to do with Netanyahu. It's with every politician. Politicians need to speak to the public, and mainly they speak to their public. And we have been failed so many times. We've seen the deal around the corner so many times in these past 2 years. Just in the past 6 months, we've heard both Trump and Netanyahu say that a deal will be signed tomorrow, then the day after tomorrow, then next week, and nothing happened. So if I can be frank, I don't care what they say. I only look at what they do. And if we look at facts on the ground, what we're seeing is that a deal was proposed, the deal I've just spoke about, referred to, which is a very good deal. And what also this deal does is that it clearly prioritizes bringing back the hostages before anything else, because after 2 years, when the hostages are at risk of dying, those who are still alive, or are at risk of being lost forever, those who were murdered, then we know that this is the most pressing issue. As at this point in time, now that we're talking on October 5th, 2025, Hamas is not an existential threat to Israel. And this is why this deal, rightfully so, prioritizes bringing back the hostages. And the other thing we're seeing is that the attacks on Gaza have significantly weakened and for some time also have stopped. And we're also looking at the negotiation team going actually to deal with the details. Lastly, what is very different in what we're seeing right now is that all the Arab countries and Turkey that were in support of Hamas, they're rallying behind President Trump and they're backing up this deal. And this is unprecedented. We've got essentially the entire world saying, this is it. We need to go for this deal, not for anything else. And what's missing in this equation is now to get the yes from Hamas and go forward with this.
Right. And I'm just, one of the things you just said right now about the priorities, and I will go also to a quote you made during a rally earlier tonight. You said the Prime Minister must understand, seems to understand the priorities must be made, that Israel cannot achieve both war without making hard choices, obviously with respect to the hostages. Can you explain that? Those priorities, something that he was not agreeing to put in the order that we thought should be up until now, and what changed? What's something truly shifting this time? What is it?
Absolutely. So, when the war began, there were two main objectives that were set forth. One is defeating Hamas, destroying Hamas, annihilating, eliminating Hamas, and the other one was bringing back all the hostages. And from the very early beginning, and you don't have to quote me on this, we've heard military people, the highest ranking people in the military, including the chiefs of staff, including the previous Minister of Security, and also the current Minister of Defense, saying that the two objectives cannot be reached together, because it's impossible for us to say to Hamas, give us all the hostages, your life insurance, and shortly after we will come after you and annihilate you. Obviously, these two don't coincide, and this is why priorities had to be made. Now, within prioritizing, we had to make sure that Hamas no longer poses an existential threat to Israel. We have seen on October 7th what they're able to do and what they're willing to do. The horrors, the atrocities that they've committed. It's inconceivable that we will allow this to happen again. Now, some people claim that we should fight Hamas until it's eliminated. The problem with that is that it means we will keep going with this war for months on end or years on end until Hamas is eliminated, on the way losing all the hostages. Not to speak about losing soldiers and the devastation in Gaza and also in Israel, what it causes to the Israeli population paying the price for this war. That's one alternative. Other people in the other extreme thought, all right, we should stop the war as soon as it began and bring back all the hostages. Obviously, this didn't happen. And we have reached a point where all the top ranking people in the IDF, in the negotiation team, and at some point also the defense ministers said, all right, these two objectives conflict. And now, and I think the current chief of staff have been very, very adamant in saying, we have nothing more to achieve militarily. There are no more strategic goals in Gaza. The delta, the difference of what we will do militarily in Gaza will not change anything significantly on the ground. And therefore, we must turn all of our efforts into completing the other objective, bringing back all the hostages. And then, after we've done this, we've got the knife off our throats. Then we can act freely. And more so, and this is, you've asked a big question, so excuse me for elaborating, but I think this is something that a lot of people are missing. In order to defeat a terrorist organization that is so embedded within the population, that has such an enormous infrastructure in Gaza and abroad, the way to fight it, the way to eliminate it, the way to make sure it no longer poses a threat the way it did on October 6th is not by military power. We have weakened it enough, and from this point on, we have to fight it financially, dry it out, make sure that no funds go into Gaza and they're not sanctioned and we don't know where they're going, that every piece of supply, every sack of cement that goes into Gaza, we make sure that it goes to construction overground, not underground, that there's no more smuggling from the southern border, that there are no more tunnels that were used against Israel and we knew that they existed, that they're not using the supplies that Israel delivered, by the way, for years and years, that they're not used to create missiles and arms that are used against us. And I can keep going on and on and on and on. But the last two things that must happen, and nothing would change otherwise, is find an alternative to Hamas and de-radicalization.
Udi,
Because what we have to, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah.
As you understand, this is something that I feel very, very strongly
No, you
about.
explain it so good. You really explain it so good to us. And I want to ask you, I mean, it seems that President Trump has a really fast grasp of what you just said, the priorities, the need to take the hostages first, and also listening to him very carefully. I was I don't want to say amazed or surprised, but I was impressed, I would say, time after time, how he explains that people who were killed in battle, protecting the kibbutz, or people that were, murdered inside captivity or murdered in the Nova Festival and then taken. So time after time, he says, people alive, but also it's very important for me that you will bring all of the hostages home. So he had this quick grasp of the protest in Israel, of the wish of the Israeli public. He's posting images and videos of those demonstrations. It's quite amazing to see that. I'll just add one more question. My daughter, she's 21, and she asked me today, isn't it amazing that the president of the United States is keeping himself so busy with this little country on the other side of the world, which, I mean, it has, huge issues, the shutdown, the immigrants, other wars, U.S. economy, the Wall Street, and more and more and more. And still, she said to me, how much of his day he's taken to dealing with Israel? So that's quite amazing.
I completely agree, and I would tell you something that I was told very, very early on, and I think you being a political correspondent, I'm sure you know this for years. At the end of the day, everything is personal. Everything is personal. All the big ideologies, all the big ideas, all the dealings between countries, at the end of the day, everything is personal. And we know that his envoy to the Middle East, Witkoff, has a very, very warm corner in his heart for Israel and for the Israelis and for the Jewish people. And he is, openly Jewish. And we made sure very early on, as soon as it became evident that Trump was going to be the next president of the United States, we made sure that we use, whatever we can to get close to him and have him realize what this means, not just to the families, because at the end of the day, it's not about us. When he posted just last night, he posted 2 posts of the demonstrations in Israel calling out to him to help us end the war and bring all the hostages back, then he knows what the Israeli public thinks and wants and what the polls say, and he sees it on the streets, and we just make sure that it's in front of his eyes and he can't miss this. And I think you were absolutely accurate to say, at the end of the day, this little country in the Middle East, but this little country in the Middle East represent a far bigger interest that he has in stability in the Middle East. Because what happens between Israel and Hamas, or Israel and Gaza, has influence over the Bay countries and over Saudi Arabia, and possible collaborations and agreements that are worth far more than the billions of dollars. They're worth huge stability in the region that allows unimaginable, not just prosperity in financial terms, but also in what we Western countries and liberal countries and countries who want to end war and fight radicalization, which at the end of the day, if you think of it, this is what the US actually means to the world. This big symbol of freedom of thought and freedom of speech and liberties, personal liberties. And at the end of the day, it's the opposition to oppression and the opposition to all these radical countries that are trying to spread their radical ideology. And I think, in a sense, the Israeli Hamas conflict represents that. And I think this is why he has, aside from all the other interests and financial interests and all that, I think he understands the meaning of this.
Do you have any idea who is holding Tal? I'm asking this because I've heard from a family member of another hostage today on the radio that they think that the Palestinians Islamic Jihad and not Hamas is holding their hostage, a person who was murdered, and they're holding his remains. Do you? I mean, if you cannot talk about that, that's fine. But if you know anything, just out of
Right.
curiosity.
I think, what, this is something that I won't. So everything that might be sensitive, I always advise I take advice from Ella, Tal's wife. So I'm not entirely sure that I can discuss this.
Okay.
But I will say something else, though. What I think Israel has done right throughout this time is that we or the mediators, we only deal with Hamas, and we let Hamas do all the mediation within Gaza. So
With
at
other
the end of the
terrorist
day,
organizations.
you're absolutely right. We don't know who's holding every single hostage, but Hamas is the one we hold responsible for bringing all of them back.
Yeah. And your family has waited, I think, 68 days for Tal, and then came the knock on the door of the place where Ella, his wife, were staying. She was evacuated to a hotel at the time with her 3 little kids, and one was on the way. Can you take us back to the moment where he's your beloved cousin, you were really good friends, spending all of your summers together when you were kids and as grown-ups. Can you take us back to that moment where you understood that he was killed in battle?
So, as you've said, for 2 months, we were still clinging to the hope that we will get him back. And we didn't really know, and I would say this to the right of the IDF, that they don't say anything until they're 100% sure. And this is why we couldn't get a definite answer prior to that. I wasn't in Israel at the time. I was on a delegation to the EU, and I got a phone call late at night. I was on my way back to the airport in Paris, and I got a phone call from Tal's uncle saying that the IDF was just here, and they announced, they told us officially. What I now know is that when they showed up, and they've asked, every family has an officer that was appointed to them, that they could either bring new information that rises, or they help in communicating between the families and the different departments of the state, social services and so on. And what I learned later is that the officer came to the hotel and he asked Tela, could we go in a private room? And as soon as he said that, she knew what he was going to say. And yeah, and she called the other members of the family, and she called the kids, and her daughter refused to go in the room. And it's interesting because they didn't know, right? They didn't know what he was going to tell them, but obviously, they all had this sense of what was coming. And then he announced that what happened is that they found Tal's helmet in the kibbutz, and they sent it for analysis. And it took some time because the analysis didn't take place in a lab in Israel, and this is why it took 2 months. And as soon as they got the report, they found tissue. I'm not going to be too descriptive, but they found tissue that if it's found outside the human body, then the person is no longer alive. And that was unfortunately the news that they've received. And then shortly after, Tal's uncle called me to let me know that this was
Udi,
it.
can you tell us about Tal? I mean, about his youth, about your family, your extended family, about the way his fatherhood. I mean, the kid that you just mentioned, Tal's elder daughter, I suppose. How
Yeah.
old is she? How old was she at the time? And the kids had to suffer those horrific hours at the shelter inside the house for all of those hours. So whatever you can tell us about him.
Sure. So Tal is not only third generation Holocaust survivor, he's also third generation Israeli pioneer, because when our mutual grandparents were dropped off a pickup truck on a sand dune in the Negev and were told, this is where you're going to build the kibbutz, little did they know that their children and their grandchildren would continue this tradition of really, settling in the far corners of Israel, on right on the border where there's real danger. And I think this is something that most people are unaware of, that living in the southern Negev close to Gaza in the past 10 or 15 years, it's an ideological choice, because a lot of people would come and they would see, the green lush lawns and the beautiful communities, but what they might miss is the sometimes daily missile launches. So choosing to live in the kibbutz when your children would grow up under missile attacks, this is an ideological choice. And this is the first thing I want you to know about Tal, that he was very much a Zionist in the sense of loving Israel and believing in living there, and living not in Tel Aviv or in the center where it's close and safe, but living where he thought we should be. Aside from that, he was very much a family man. He was very family oriented. You can see him with his parents and his kids. And the Chaimi family is a big clan in Kibbutz Nir Yitzchak. They would spend a lot of time together. Just imagine, Tal has a sister, and his dad, Zohar, which you can see here, has two brothers living in the kibbutz, and they have their own families, and everybody would get together in some in some way, shape, or form, literally every day. And every Friday you would have a Friday dinner, and they would all be together. And Tal was always the first to lend a hand in anything that was needed, but mainly if you needed something repaired or built. He was a civil engineer. He was very good with his hands. He always had a Letterman in his pocket. So if you needed something fixed, or if you got new IKEA furniture and you needed something built, he would be the one he would call. And throughout these 2 years, when I keep speaking in front of audiences, and every now and again someone comes up to me and says, I actually worked with Tal, or I've just met him for a day in this whatever professional workshop, or I served in the army with him. The other day I took the train, and the guy saw I was wearing a shirt with Tal's picture on it, and he says, how do you know this guy? And I go, he's my cousin. And he says, you won't believe it, but I served in reserve duty with him, and at some point he became a part of the emergency squad of his kibbutz, and he left reserve duty because this was one or the other, and we all mourned it because he was the one to always fix things and like do all the little things that nobody can really do, and he would be a problem solver. And this is what he's really remembered by. Never the first. Like, if you walk into a room, he was never the first you would notice. He was kind of shy. He didn't take up a lot of space, but when you needed help, yeah, this is very typical. His daughter, Einav, and him. Yeah,
The kids,
yeah,
the kids in the family in Ella, they were homeless. Not really homeless, but out of their internally
yeah. They
displaced,
were evacuated for a long time.
evacuated in a hotel, and then moving from a place to place. It's again, as we mentioned earlier, as we mark Sukkot as of tomorrow, the people that are nomads, that are moving from one place to another. But Ella very bravely has moved back to the kibbutz Ner Yitzchak, with the four kids. The youngest is less than 2 years. As we said, he was
Yeah,
born in
less
May.
than a year and a half. Yeah.
Yeah, and she gave birth only on May 2024. But with the little one, she moved back very bravely to the kibbutz. What can you tell us about their
It
new
was a
life?
very, very hard decision. A very hard decision. We spoke recently, and she said, she never believed that she would be back in the kibbutz before Tal was back in the kibbutz. And on the one hand, for her, it's like admitting she gave up. Like, this is it. We're not holding our grounds anymore. We're going back to the kibbutz, and it's a very, very difficult sensation or emotion to walk with, this guilt. On the other hand, the kids were evacuated from their homes for almost 2 years, and they had everything taken away from them: their homes, their communities, their dad. Any kind of stability that kids need was just taken away from them. And at the end of the day, the kibbutz is their home, you know? And most people are back in the kibbutz, so they get to see their cousins again. They get to walk in the kibbutz trails that they know and are familiar with. And this is a huge thing. So I think the kids were the biggest consideration in going back. And but she has to, for herself, she has to keep saying, but I'm not abandoning Tal. This is not instead of bringing him back. Tal needs to be back on the grounds of the kibbutz, but the
So
kids
I've heard
have to
her
be
in
considered.
I've heard her in many interviews, in many radio interviews, saying how the burial process, which may occur, we hope soon, is very important for the kids, and they're very young kids. But she explained it, in radios, explaining why it is so important for the kids to have a closure. Can you explain that to us? I mean, it's more than just the Jewish importance of this process, but for the family.
Absolutely, it's far more than the Jewish tradition or just symbolism. When you lose someone, you go through the different stages of grief, and I'm sure every one of our viewers unfortunately has experienced some kind of loss, and you go through the mourning process, and first there's denial, and then there's anger, and forgive me if I'm not getting the stages right, but at the end of the day you come to terms with your loss, and you move on, and you're able to rebuild and grow out of your pain and out of your loss. What's happening with the families of the murdered hostages is that we're just stuck on the first stage, which, if you look at the books, at the textbooks, this is pathological. This is called a disease. When you lose someone and you're stuck in the first stage, and you don't process and you don't move forward, you go to therapy. You go to get help in order to move forward. However, the huge problem is that we just can't, because we're just stuck. The circumstances are such that we're stuck, and this causes what is known as compound trauma. Because on the one hand, he's lost, you're mourning them, but you're not moving forward. So you're stuck in this perpetual state of loss and grief, and you're unable to move away from it. And that doesn't allow you, as I've just said about going back to the kibbutz, which is to the benefit of the kids. But it goes with a lot of guilt, and it goes with a lot of shame, and it goes with a lot of thinking, wait, am I abandoning Tal? And of course not. And if you just think about it, if grown-ups have a really hard time dealing with it, then kids who are 11 or 9, do they even have the tools to deal with it?
Right.
Of course not. All they know is that their dad left the home one day and never came back.
Right.
This is all they know. And then people tell them he's dead. They haven't seen him. They don't know why. They just need to take someone's word for it. What child can deal with that?
Exactly. Udi, you are Tal's cousin, and for nearly 2 years now, you've been coming to the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, every week, fighting for the return of Tal and for the remaining hostages. And this place, and I know it from firsthand, is a very tough place, the Israeli parliament, especially for people who are fighting for something so basic, so human, something that shouldn't even require a fight. It should it should be understood as a clear day to everyone. And you're back there all the time. It's very, very tough on you, I suppose. Do you want to talk about that a bit?
Absolutely. And your description is very straight to the point. I was there for months on end, and until I felt at some point it was almost futile, and I felt that I had to defend myself, to save myself, and do some other things. And at some point I took the backstage, and I actually became a part of the management team of the forum, of the Hostage Family Forum. And luckily, Tal's uncle, Zamir, which is also very, very active, he kind of stood in and started going and expressing, speaking in the name of the family. But you're right. You sit there, and I think I don't know if it's just in the Israeli parliament. I think many people that are not professional politicians and had some kind of engagement with the political realm may have experienced this, because you go there and you think and you think you're talking about the most obvious thing, and you're trying to speak about reason, and speak about what's right, and speak about values, and speak about what's in Israel's interest. And you get a lot of nods, and you get a lot of hugs, and you get a lot of empathy, and you get absolutely no results. And nothing changes on the ground. And not only that, a lot of times you would hear, on private conversations, you would hear people saying, you're right. If I were you, I would do the same. Actually, if I were you, I would escalate much further. And then they're admitting that the cause is right. They're admitting that this is what has to be done, and then they don't act on it.
Yeah.
And this is incredibly
It's
frustrating.
difficult. Having said that, the Israeli public is completely on board. I mean, for more than a year now, you have like between 60 to 70% of the public, even sometimes 75%, saying hostages first in exchange. I mean, end the war in exchange for all hostages. I think it was, and it's still a top priority of the Israeli public. Every poll suggests that. I mean, I agree that the fight in the Knesset would sometime waste of time, but it gave the families this presence on the media, and with that came the public support. So you saw that during that really hard period. And again, I hope we can, end this period, hopefully, but we don't know that yet. We cannot, be sure that it will end, but maybe.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. And this is why we as the forum, we didn't give up on this platform. It at the end of the day, going to the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, it's the house of the people. It's not the house of the politicians. And this is why the people should be there, and the people should speak out, and the people should have their voices heard. And you know what? And there's other forums that took after us and started going, and some of them don't think what we think and
Right.
don't think we need to prioritize this way. And I think that to a large extent this is what should happen, because their voices can and should also be heard. And you're right that the parliament is the place that always draws media and always draws interest, and we definitely wanted to be there and not just have the media cover what the politicians say, but also cover what the people say, what we the families have to say. And that's on the one hand. And then on the other hand, you were also right in saying that we need to make sure that our presence is seen there, that the politicians understand that we will not give up. We will never give up on this campaign, on this struggle to bring back our loved ones. It's not even an option. It doesn't matter what happens. It doesn't matter how hard it is. It doesn't matter how much they're willing or reluctant to hear what we have to say. These people have to come back to Israel. And that in itself is a goal, to show our stamina and to show that we are going to stand firm demanding this.
So we are coming to an end almost of the show. I wanted to say that for those of you who were not aware, Jaime, that's the last name of Tal, your cousin, Jaime means my life. Chaim Sheli, my life.
Like
And
Lechaim.
Tal led a very brave life. He was protecting the kibbutz with his own life, and I think this kibbutz specifically was the massacre took place, but many people were saved thanks to Tal. And we are working endlessly. I mean, the forum, not me personally, but me here, to
You're a
make
part of
sure
it. You're a part of
that
the effort, no doubt.
exactly that Tal will get a proper and dignified end of life ceremony. Let's hope, Udi, let's hope that this is our last podcast. I mean, I said it last week, and I didn't know that we were going to be here again today, but I'm still hoping that we don't have to talk about any hostages anymore in this podcast in English or Hebrew or elsewhere. And last sentence before I have some, notes to make at the end of the podcast. But if you want to say one more sentence, the floor is yours.
Yes, I want to say one last thing about Tal. As we see his photo, I want to tell you a short anecdote about who this person was. As he was out patrolling the perimeter of the kibbutz, knowing that there are terrorists on the front gate of the kibbutz, knowing that they've already killed some of the emergency squad members, he, on his way to fight them, he stopped by the house, told Ella to be as safe as she could. He tried to calm her down while saying, "There's danger. There are people trying to get into the kibbutz, but it's okay. We've got it covered." He didn't want to alarm her. And as he went out, fully knowing that unfortunately their safe room door didn't lock. The handle was broken. So fully knowing that if the terrorists actually made it all the way to that side of the kibbutz, his family wasn't safe. They could break in and they could get them. But still, he didn't choose to stay there and defend them. He chose to go out and defend his community and his kibbutz. And on his way to the front gate, knowing that he was going to fight terrorists that are fully armed and have already killed people, he made a phone call, one of his last phone calls, to work, half an hour away, to ask them, how are they doing? Right? When all this goes through his mind, this is what he does. And this was the person that Tal was.
Incredible.
And this is how I would want him remembered. Not just as a hero, but also as a person with a huge heart that knew what's right. He just knew what's right and he did what's right.
Amazing.
And
We
this
miss
is what
him.
I want people to know about him.
We miss him without even knowing him. Udi, I want to thank you. Before we wrap up, I just want to say you can scan the barcode of this episode in the description and you can donate to the Hostages and Missing Families Forum. You can join a rally in your area. Just Google Run for Their Lives. It will give you a website with all of the events near you all over the United States. It usually takes place on Sunday, so next Sunday you can participate. You can share this episode. You can send it through mail or through WhatsApp, or just send it to your friends and family and followers. Post it online. You can keep the hostages in your thoughts and conversation. You can just pray for them, for their return when you go to the synagogue tomorrow on the Sukkot prayer. You can mention them in the sukkah, wherever you eat or make food or share with friends. Just bring a photo of one hostage. Just think about them, talk about them. Every action helps the Israelis people keep the hostages issue alive. I want to thank you so much for listening, and maybe I'll see you next week, maybe not, we'll see. Thank you so much, and Chag Sameach.
Thank you. Chag Sameach.
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch a tiger by the toe. If he hollers, let him go. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Not some, not half, all of them. Now, bring them all, achieve peace.